It's getting dark as we approach the island. Heading out from SCRABSTER on a medium-sized car ferry. It's been raining all afternoon. Some might call it miserable. But I wouldn't have it any other way. Standing out on deck, I'm getting a real sense of what it must have been like for ancient mariners making the short but treacherous crossing from the British mainland, all those centuries ago. I can't help it. I'm excited. I've been reading about the place for years. We're about to enter a primordial land of Neolithic burial chambers and Viking sea fortresses. Then, we see it. Cliff tops rising from the gloom. Orkney. It isn't like the rest of Britain up here. There's just something about it. There's a different feel to the place. It's more Nordic, atmospheric, and there's a good reason for that. Until the later Middle Ages, this was part of Scandinavia. And that legacy lives on here, in DNA, place names, culture, and the very landscape itself. My name's Pete Kelly. In September 2018, I took a trip to the northernmost point on the British mainland, and further to Orkney. Right now, it's early 2021. I can't go anywhere at the moment. So come with me, if you will, on this trip back in time. To see stone circles, ancient tombs, and Viking fortresses. Let's go. It's late summer. We've been travelling north all day, to the very far north of Britain. And finally, we reached the area known as Sutherland. It's my first indication this isn't a normal trip. We're going upside down, crossing into the borders of another cultural sphere, emanating from even further to the north and east. We're in the borderlands. This rugged land is called that for a good reason, an information board lets me know. For 1,000 years ago, this was deemed a southerly region of the Norse Sea Empire. A cultural sphere of Scandinavian influence, in this case originating in Norway, that once stretched from southern Ireland in a wide arc all the way into Russia and the Far East beyond. On our way up here, we passed through the ancient land of the Picts too. And their ancestors, the Brock Builders. Known as CAITHNESS today, vast tracts of empty land stretch out from the highway. Loomed over by massive wind turbines. I tried to spy any Brocks on the horizon, but we're simply going too fast. We have a destination in mind. Then, finally, we reach it. The most northerly harbour on the British mainland, known as the Standing on the Edge in Old Norse. SCRABSTER has been a seaport since the 9th century, and it's still very much in use today. And just like that, we say goodbye to the mainland. Then again, everything is about to change once more. We're about to enter another mainland. Time for another perspective shift. You don't go onto Orkney, you go into it. Much like we were just in Scotland, we're now in Orkney. STENNESS to be precise. We leave immediately, heading towards our accommodation in Kirkwall, the largest settlement on the islands. And what to do when you first arrive in Orkney? Well, we do what all good Vikings do. We go to the pub, of course. This one has the Orkneyinga saga written all over the walls, and a great selection of local craft beer and gin. I'm going to like this place. It's precisely that saga, plastered on the walls, one of the most famous of all, written sometime during the 13th century in Iceland, which enables us to know so much about the history up here compared to many other places. Sure, it might not be the most accurate record of information, but at least it exists. Stories clutched from the passage of time, where so many others have disintegrated into oblivion. Oh, what I'd give for a chronicle of the kings of Mercia, written just a few hundred years after the event. Instead, we have nothing. "800 years ago, these islands were part of a flourishing storytelling tradition, dating back to the pre-literate Scandinavian societies of bygone days. The words of those speakers still reverberate today. They hint at a time far before the present. A time of monsters and villains, but of great heroes too. It took a long time for those legends to die out up here in the north, and it's no wonder. The very place exudes mystery and awe. Winters are harsh up here, and the warm hearth of a storyteller's fire could at least provide some solace to those huddled around. Of course, by the time Norsemen came here in the 8th and 9th centuries, making the short crossing from Norway to escape royal persecution, if the sagas are to be believed, this was already an ancient land. The long abandoned, windswept remains of Neolithic villages still scatter the shoreline, along with ancient stone circles, made by elves and fairies, if the Icelandic traditions are to be believed. During the last century, it was once assumed that the native inhabitants of the islands had been wiped out by those Norse incomers. Though today, archaeology and now DNA tells a different story. People had already lived up here for thousands of years by the time those Norsemen arrived, and they would continue to do so. We hit the hay, but in the morning we'll see some of the great works of those ancestors, and find out why this place is one of the most important Stone Age landscapes on the planet. Heading out west from Kirkwall, there's only one place to go first. If you're here for the ancient history, you simply have to go. As we get to the car park, tyres crunching on the gravel. We can already see it. This is the Stones of STENNESS. Dating to around 3100 BC, centuries before the pyramids of Egypt. Originally, some 12 stones stood here, surrounded by a massive henge. By itself, STENNESS would have been one of the largest and most impressive stone circles in the world. The result of an estimated 12,500 consecutive hours of labour. But as we shall see, the place isn't alone. Over the last century, STENNESS has been extensively examined, with a square setting located at the centre, found to contain a hearth fire. How it all originally appeared is difficult to say. It would probably surprise us though. Huge amounts of effort went into these places, and the location for it feels very special. Surrounded by hills and water, there is a surprising amount of visibility over what must have been a sacred landscape. It could be that today mere vestiges remain on this landscape of a much more extensive ceremonial and lived-in environment. We have other examples of this that are only gradually being revealed. At the other end of Britain, for example, Dorchester's ceremonial landscape contained what is now described as a mega henge, along with a variety of other massive monuments. Stonehenge also has a recently discovered mega henge that puts the stone circle at Avebury, largest known in the world, to shame. What's really fascinating about this place though, is that here, on the far northern extremity of Britain, a revolution in thought seems to have taken place some 5,000 years ago. Believe it or not, and many archaeologists dispute the idea of course, but for a time, this windswept archipelago on the North Sea, bordered by the harsh waves of the Atlantic on one side, the foreboding cliffs of far-off Scotland on the other, may have been the centre of this new, unique form of architecture that would sweep through Britain. For this may well be one of the earliest stone circles found anywhere. But there's more. After several hundreds of years of use, construction at another site would begin. One that dwarfs STENNESS in scale. A gentle stroll today, the pathway between STENNESS and this second stone circle is thought to have once been a processional way. At its end stands the Ring of BRODGAR. It might just be my favourite stone circle anywhere. Walking along that pathway, I get a real feeling of what it might have felt like for our ancestors to approach this place. In a circle measuring 104 metres across, around 60 stones may have originally stood here. This is the largest on Orkney, and one of the largest in Britain. Like STENNESS, the surrounding ditch was cut straight into the bedrock, a hugely impressive sight during its lifetime, and a feat that can still be appreciated today. Walking towards this place is a haunting experience. It comes as no surprise to me that archaeologists have interpreted it as a place for the dead. It seems to stand separate on a slither of land surrounded by water. With an estimated 80,000 man-hours needed to construct it, BRODGAR dwarfs STENNESS in scale. The result of a vibrant culture at the very height of its technological capabilities, showing off. Ceremonies may have taken place at night. The heart of the Ring of Brodgar could have served as an observatory to monitor the passing of the seasons and bring in the harvest for this earliest of farming societies. The Ring of Brodgar remains especially enigmatic today, and though little in-depth archaeology has been carried out at the site, the stones are generally considered to have originated on all far-flung corners of the Orkneys. It's been suggested each stone could have been brought by an individual village, community, or clan, coming together here, putting aside their differences to work with each other for a common purpose. Something greater than themselves that would stand the test of time. And there's much more to this landscape than the still visible stone circles. In recent decades, a vast, monumental walled complex was found here, just across the water at the Ness of Brodgar. Sea levels have changed since this place was built. But the latest research suggests that practically the entire peninsula was once taken up by monumental structures. Remains of other stone circles can be found too, where today only individual monoliths remain. Like the Comet Stone by Brodgar, the Watch Stone by the Stones of STENNESS, and Barnhouse Stone nearby. What a sight this must have been to behold. No other henge sites have been found on the islands, but yet more ancient monuments, remarkable in themselves, can be found nearby. Surely part of this same landscape. Just a short walk away, jutting out of a farmer's field, with sheep standing guard. This is MAESHOWE. It doesn't look like much from the outside, reminding me of burial mounds I've seen all over Britain and beyond. But it's what's inside that is truly incredible. Around 800 years ago, so says the Orkney saga, vicious storms racked the islands. Making their way carefully across the wind-slashed plains, a band of warriors returning from crusade in the Holy Land spy this mound in the distance. Disregarding any thoughts of disturbing the ancestors, and at real risk of succumbing to exposure, they force their way inside. Their visit perhaps still being seen in runic graffiti that covers the walls. The most significant found anywhere. They saw a phenomenally complex structure built at least 3,000 years before the age of the Vikings. By the time those warriors broke into the place, it had already been looted by earlier Norsemen, and little remained inside when modern archaeologists first arrived at the place. The structure itself tells us a lot about what was going on though. This is an exceptionally complex building. There wasn't much wood to use up here for building, but these Stone Age people made up for it. With a long passageway leading on into a central chamber, there are similarities here to the vast site of Newgrange in Ireland, and tombs in northern Wales like Bryn Cethlu D on Anglesey. The nearby Barnhouse stone in a field 700 metres away is perfectly aligned to the entrance, allowing the direct light of the setting sun into the chamber for just a few days each side of the winter solstice, lighting the back wall up. This mathematical configuration is just one tiny insight into the ceremonies that would have been carried out here. Though similar to other lands across the sea, MAESHOWE type tombs consisting of a long passage are found exclusively on Orkney. A later, more sophisticated development from older tomb types found on the islands. Some archaeologists even think that MAESHOWE might have originally been surrounded by another large stone circle, of which the Barnhouse stone remains as the only survivor. Low roads connect Neolithic ceremonial sites throughout Britain, and Orkney is no exception. A still visible ancient pathway linking up MAESHOWE to STENNESS, the Ring of Brodgar, and on to the magnificently preserved village of SKARA BRAE. A concentration of Neolithic sites rivalled only by the ceremonial complexes of Stonehenge, Avebury and the Boyne Valley. But of course, this landscape is just the most famous and impressive of many found all over the islands. Much further south is another fantastic place to visit. A far smaller, more intimate setting, perhaps representative of how slightly more regular, everyday people lived their lives. I'd never heard of this place, but on following the advice of the guy at the MAESHOWE Visitors Centre, we decided to visit. So, weighed down by books, we head south. When local farmer Ronald Simison went out looking for building stone in 1958, he found something completely unexpected. Standing on a windswept cliff's edge on South Ronaldsay, the southernmost of Orkney's islands, staring out over the waves for 5,000 years, this is ISBISTER, known more famously as the Tomb of the Eagles. Today, the place has a very special, intimate feel, just as it must have done all those millennia ago, when it was a centre of worship and ritual life for the people of this island. I stand and I look out to sea, trying to think of what it must have been like for these people, all those centuries ago. During the excavations that followed, evidence was found that the tomb had originally contained large quantities of human bones. some of which today are displayed in the local visitors centre. Usually at places like MAESHOWE, tombs were opened and explored long ago, leaving little left for modern archaeologists. It's a rarity to find an untouched tomb like that at ISBISTER. Though, interestingly, only the bones from certain individuals were found here, nowhere near enough to be the whole community. Apparently, only people who were important enough were interred within. Interestingly, many disabled people were found here, apparently related to each other through a genetic line. As ridiculously powerful winds bear down on us, standing here between open plains and the rough sea. Make no mistake, this was a very hard, short life. The bones show signs of disease, injury, and early death. Unlike the earlier tombs found on the islands, ISBISTER is a hybrid type, moving towards the magnificent architecture at MAESHOWE, but not quite there yet. These tombs were meant to be entered, to inter individuals, and perhaps to commune with the dead too. Though mostly faded away now, artwork can sometimes be found on walls too. I get the idea, like religious buildings today, this was a temple as much as a grave. But this wasn't where people spent most of their time. Up on the high cliffs, this was a place apart. Settlements were probably spread out far and wide around, along with individual plots of land. Of course, the most famous part of this tomb is where it gets its name. Amongst the piles of human bones, animal remains were found too. Mostly of a specific type, sea eagles, lots of them. This, coupled with the at least 36 red deer found at a tomb at Yarso, and 24 dog skulls found at CUWEEN Hill Cairn, has led experts to suggest totemic animals being adopted by various groups. It's a captivating idea. Surely this would have been a great place for the clan of the sea eagle. It sounds like something straight out of historical fiction. But just maybe, it might have happened. Out of everything I saw on Orkney, the Tomb of the Eagles was possibly the highlight, due to its complete unexpectedness. Again, I leave weighed down by more books, but there's plenty more to see yet. And we haven't even got to the Bronze Age. Today, archaeologists flock to Orkney, to the incredible variety of sites in the mainland, but in the other islands too. Nearby RONALDSAY, for example, being dubbed the Egypt of the North, due to the sheer amount of archaeological sites here. But there was a time when this wasn't entirely the case. In 1927, one of the earliest archaeologists to come here to do serious work would ultimately become one of the giants of 20th century prehistory, an Australian, V. Gordon Childe. His destination? a now world-famous ancient village uncovered by a storm in the 1800s. Originally thought to be Pictish in origin due to its immaculate preservation. It wasn't until 1931 that Child realised the village not to be Pictish, but so much older, dating to somewhere between 3200 and 2500 BC. Unfortunately, we only have time to drive past SKARA BRAE. For some reason, at the time, I'm more interested in monuments and fortresses. Another place I'll have to go back to. Far from an exceptional settlement, SKARA BRAE is amazing in its normality, surviving only because of the lack of timber building materials up here in the north, rather than any other reason. Linked up, sunken houses to protect from the elements, containing dressing tables even. All made from local sandstone, the same used for the nearby stones of STENNESS, and still used to make houses today. Just as it begins to get dark, we approach another monument. This one separated in time from BRODGAR and STENNESS by thousands of years. This is the Broch of Gurness, one of those Iron Age structures we drove past on the way to Orkney. Mostly dating to the second half of the first millennium BC, 3 rings of formidable stone ramparts and ditches surround a central settlement complex and tower. Originally as much as 10 metres tall. The planned settlement here includes latrines and a drainage system. During this time when Broch building dominated the Orkneys, this largest of Brochs was clearly one of the most important settlements on the islands. Probably a royal centre. Interestingly, it's not just British artefacts that are found here, but a scattering of Roman items too. Pottery perhaps used to carry olives or sweet wines to the islands, and a ring with a legionary eagle on it. Writing much later, the Roman writer Eutropius wrote that the Orcadian king was amongst those who submitted to the Emperor Claudius in 43 AD upon invading the island. And later still, Tacitus claimed that the general Agricola briefly visited and conquered the islands during his circumnavigation of Britain in 80 AD. Yet, for the most part, unlike southern Scotland, Roman rule never made it this far. And the extent of Roman involvement here remains unclear. By this time though, like the rest of Scotland, Broch building seems to have ground to a halt. Life continued at Gurness until the 5th century AD, though by this time the Broch itself had fallen into ruins, ultimately being built over. The culture had changed yet again, and settlement patterns with it. This was the age of the Picts, and we will see one of their settlements next. Every now and again, up here in the north, it gets extremely windy. As we drive over massive dikes built during the Second World War, we head past SCAPA Flow, the home base of the British Navy during that conflict. And I feel like the car is about to take off. We visit an old chapel made by Italian prisoners of war. A long way from home for those men, but at least they had a sense of purpose during those dark times. Finally, after a hearty lunch and good local beer, we find ourselves on the very north of the island. We spot seals lounging around by the shore. They're all over the beach. Unfortunately, I only have an old DSLR with one lens at this point, so no close-up shots. But then, without even really intending it, we stumble upon a mighty sea fortress of old. This was the sort of place the descendants of those Brock builders moved their power centres to, in the centuries following the coming of the Romans. A citadel of Pictish kings. And it is to that murky early medieval age of saints and warlords, of myths and heroes, that we now must turn. In the year 565, so says the Irish chronicler Adamnan, the grizzled missionary and church leader Columba made his way to the court of the Pictish High King near Inverness, asking King Brodie to ensure the safety of the Christian hermits now making inroads on the windswept isles of the far north. But Brodie wasn't alone. Along with the various kings of Pictland stood the ruler of the Orkneys. Apparently subservient to the High King, but overlord of his own realm too, and the one in question now visited by hermits and holy men. Evidence somewhat backed up by archaeology. By the time another Pictish king named Brodie, triumphant in battle against the Anglians of Northumbria at the Battle of Dunnechtane, went north to invade Orkney in 681. More or less, all of the Picts were now Christian. Their culture was still unique though, seen on carvings found all over Scotland. The Bruff of Bursay is no exception. A fine carved slab depicting 3 bearded warriors armed with spears and shields having been found here, along with other more enigmatic Pictish symbols, fine jewellery, buildings and extensive evidence of metalworking. This was a royal or at least elite centre, complete with a chapel and numerous houses. The buildings we see today, however, were built later by another culture. By the 9th century, times were changing on Orkney. At Gurness, a Norse woman was buried. Her grave goods can be seen at nearby Orkney Museum in Kirkwall, alongside many artefacts from the Bronze Age, Iron Age, and the Age of the Picts. At MAESHOWE, evidence suggests similar burials were made too, newcomers staking a claim to the landscape. For this was the age of the Vikings. Though much of the original settlement may have fallen into the sea over the last 1,000 years, the Bruff of Bursay has seen much excavation in recent years. longhouses and mead halls have been revealed, as well as Romanesque church buildings. Nearby coves for beaching longships, as well as Christian artefacts. This was a place between two worlds. The new Europe of papally sanctioned crusades and landed aristocrats. As much as the Germanic world of old, relayed so poetically in the Orkneyinga saga, the story of the Earls of Orkney. And it was here at BRAE that at least one of those earls, contemporary of William the Conqueror, made his base. We know him as Thorfinn the Mighty. His father, Sigurd, had been one of the most powerful rulers of Orkney yet. Born of a Norse marauder and an Irish princess. In the year 1014, along with a coalition of Vikings from all corners of the Irish Sea and beyond, he'd led a great host of warriors into battle at Clontarf to wage war against the High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, still bearing the raven banner of Odin as he marched to his doom. At least publicly, Sigurd had been a Christian. In the saga tradition, forced to convert at around the turn of the millennium by the formidable King of Norway, Olaf Tryggvason. Though, like most converts, perhaps even Olaf himself, in private, Sigurd may well have carried on his old faith. The next generation would be different, however. Sigurd had many sons, who of course warred amongst themselves after his death. Eventually, the victor of the struggle was one named Thorfinn. Born of a Scottish mother, Thorfinn had been raised at the court of his grandfather in Scotland. And when he came here to Orkney, he began Christianising the islands in earnest. But, like monarchs all over Europe, the new faith didn't stop him from waging war. Far from it. A formidable warlord during his day. During a lengthy and fascinating career, Thorfinn regularly ravaged his way across the Scottish mainland, raiding England in 1042 and dealing with all the major kings of the era. Even going on pilgrimage to Rome, after which, according to the sagas, he built a church here at BRAE. Contemporary of Macbeth, King Canute and Edward the Confessor, Thorfinn the Mighty was practically a king in his own right, before dying in around 1065, right at the traditional end of the Viking Age. Had history gone slightly differently, Orkney may well have remained Scandinavian to this day. That's it for the history on this trip. We go to a gin tasting. And on the last day, I reach 50,000 subscribers on my main channel, History Time. I leave Orkney determined to return, particularly now I have my drone to use. Thanks for watching. My name's Pete Kelly. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time.